Welcome to our media briefing, and welcome to those who are watching us over the internet or listening over the internet. We'll start with questions from the media. Anything cooking out there?
You tell us.
Well, we gave you our secret agenda last night.
I know. I gave it back though. I want points for that.
Okay.
What is happening with the tax package that leadership is? I know the House is going to caucus this evening on that.
Mhm.
Are you just as Senate Republicans waiting for that?
Mhm. Yes.
Are you talking to them at all in their caucus, or any presentation or anything, or is that their leadership?
Their leadership is doing that. If they ask, I would probably go over and talk, just because I've got a lot of background on tax reform, but they're well educated on it, and they're trying to get their body to agree to some of the aspects, or all of the aspects of the broadening of the base and lowering of the rate. So we'll wait to see what they can decide on, and I think we're pretty flexible here in the Senate, as long as it makes some good sense, and we trust that it would.
When you say flexible, in terms of dropping parts of the package, or?
Yeah, we're very amenable to a range of ideas, and so we want to see where the House lands on something and then address it. We've already addressed the range, and they're looking at the range as a House, and so anyway, we're glad that that's at least moving forward in their body.
Some members of their leadership team have compared this process to Medicaid expansion. Does that give you pause? You know, that they need a lot of time to go through it, they're gonna meet privately and work out the details themselves, but we all know how that ended.
Well, I'm not sure, but I don't relate this to Medicaid as far as the end is concerned, but the process. They have a large body, we have a smaller body. It's more difficult for them to bring people together. That's the nature of the bodies. And we respect that completely here and understand that. And so the process they're going through, I think, is very similar to the Medicaid process. I'm optimistic that they'll come up with some kind of a solution.
So when might we actually see the legislation? And is Senator Adams carrying that, or do we know?
No, we haven't decided who's going to carry it here in the Senate. So and those things haven't been decided yet.
But the hope is to have it start in the House, have it be a House bill? Is that still the plan?
Well, that hasn't been decided absolutely, but I think it would be that would be a good, have it start there and then send it over to the House. And so we're still yet to circle back with the House leadership after they get done with their caucus, and we'll probably make those decisions at that time.
Do you expect an answer from the House after tonight's caucus? Is that the?
I'm hopeful, yes.
And if they're not really on board tonight, are we kind of just too late along
It's
the
going to be
session?
pretty late for anything to happen, yes. But I think it'll be a discussion that we'll continue to have, because there are some structural problems that we're going to be facing here in the next couple of years with our budgets, and we're going to need to address them.
Can you elaborate on structural problems?
Well, we've had a lot of flexibility to move money in and out of the transportation fund to the general fund, and education fund to the general fund, moving it in and out. But we're coming to a point when all of higher ed will be funded out of the education fund, and that now reduces any options we have in dealing with general fund and transportation fund issues by moving money through higher ed into general fund or transportation, when constitutionally, we can't do that anymore, because all of education now is funded out of the education fund. That's a long answer and maybe complicated answer. I'm trying to figure out how it's stated a little simpler, but we lose that flexibility when we can't move higher ed in and out, because now higher ed is funded completely in the education fund.
That kind of flexibility pertain to discussions on food tax, and where are we at on that?
Well, that's part of the discussion we've just had, is that the House is considering those things. I think the Senate has looked upon that proposal favorably at this point, and I think there's high probability that the Senate could pass something like that with some income tax reform. So we're just trying to get something, or land on an idea in that range that that we can all agree to.
Where's the minority caucus on this, Senator?
We're waiting, obviously, for the proposal, but we're 5, so there's some concerns, very serious concerns with the sales, the tax on food. So that's, I think, where we're struggling. We are waiting. We understand we have to address the structural balance piece as we continue to see that, especially in higher ed. So we realize we have to do something, but that's where we're struggling. But we haven't seen the proposal, so it's hard for us to say anything. Just the concept, we need to do something, and it has to be income tax. I think it has to be a lot of things. Excited for the interim review of all the tax exemptions as well. I think that needs to be comprehensive, and we need to move ahead on that. But I can tell you our caucus has concerns with the food tax component.
One piece of this, I understand from talking to the president yesterday, on the food tax, it could end up being a partial restoration of the sales tax on food. You might leave it off. That's one of the options the House is considering, maybe not restoring it fully on some specific types of food.
Very essential items.
Yeah, does that give,
That was an idea that's been thrown out. That's an idea that's being talked about in the mix.
Yeah, we haven't addressed that idea at all. So for us was, just what we've had discussed in previous years is, repealing that part.
I've heard some people say that there's talk of reducing the income tax rate so that if the Our Schools Now initiative is successful, it still won't bring you up beyond the 5% where you are now. Can you talk about that?
I don't think that's a great question. I don't think that's possible, because as we've looked at this, lowering the rate generally, I think is politically is not going to happen. And so we might lower the income tax rate for a segment of the medium to lower income, but the medium to upper income, I don't see us changing the rate much, if any.
The Tribune reported that Senator Harper's been floating this idea of bonding to speed up transportation projects and then free up some money for schools. I'm wondering if you guys have any thoughts on that. Is that something that's being supported?
I'm not sure the relationship there. We're bonding for the
I guess the
purpose
idea
of
is
building
to
roads.
Bond right now, pay for the speed up the projects, pay for them now, and then by doing the construction, you're creating jobs and it boosts the economy and you free up other transportation infrastructure.
Yeah,
I was like, okay, I was like, how do I follow this?
yeah, Senator Adams.
Yeah, there is some talk about bonding for projects, actually trying to speed them up. We're always concerned about our AAA bond rating, and we want to protect that. I think as we look at it, even with the prison, we're probably between 40 and 50% of our constitutional limit, and if you can maybe issue some bonds and try to soften the landing as you pay off your existing bonds, that is not bad policy. So I think anything we would do would keep us under the 50% limit and would accelerate some projects. There's some, I-15 tends to be the, what I call the backbone of our transportation system. And there's a need for projects. You know the gap in between Lehigh and American Fork in Utah County. There's another really more extremely difficult spot as you exit onto 215 and try to enter onto either 72nd or 90th in that area. The weaving of that traffic is causing probably some of the worst congestion in the state. There's a segment of, I think somehow it's the Forgotten Child or something in Davis County, between Clearfield and 31st Street is the same 3 lanes. I know some of you that drive in Utah County will have a tough time imagining an I-15 at 3 lanes, but it does exist. And it's between Clearfield and 31st Street. The same concrete that was poured back in the 1960s. There's never been a lane widening, additional lane. And it probably, and it's basically a bottleneck in the express lane process. It's the only portion of the express lane that isn't completed. And it's the only segment of I-15 from, I think now the turnoff to Logan, whatever road that is in Brigham City. I don't know the address, but all the way down probably to Payson. It's the only segment of I-15 that hasn't had an extra lane on it. Those are probably some hot spots, and so that's been talked about.
So if we didn't bond for them, when would we get to those types of projects? I mean, how much are we speeding things up?
The 90 South project, I don't think it's even on the list, and so that may happen years out in the future. The one in, I'd have to pull out my list, but I believe the Gap project's 2 or 3 years away. And I think the I-15 and Davis County project's 2 or 3 years away. Thing you do when you bond is you actually, if the one that's not programmed, you're able to get it done, but the other 2 that are programmed, there could be projects come behind those, and there's still a lot of needs for mobility, and so that's what we're talking about.
And of course,
The
the
other
bill.
areas-
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, one of the other areas that we might be able to help by getting some funding available earlier would be the road up to Twilla, which is just has tremendous need with all of the accidents, fatalities that have been on that road out there. The traffic has been horrible as all the growth has occurred out there, and that might be another one that might be having to be speeding up this process.
Widening or something?
And recreational hotspots is another thing that we've talked about. We've got problems at Arches and Moab and Zions. And we've got Little Cottonwood Canyon that's a nightmare. But one of the things that we want to do, and it is very critical, when they did Centennial Highway back in the 1990s, I think President Beatty was the Senate president. They actually put together a list, and we've at least I'm personally opposed. I think the majority of people I've talked to, legislators I've talked to, are opposed to putting together any list. We want this to be Transportation Commission generated, and if we do any bonding, the Transportation Commission, who will be the experts and is charged with this responsibility, will prioritize the projects.
What does that bond mean for some of the building projects that are on the list? Because there isn't a lot of one-time money. And I know you've got some big projects, including that $50 million hospital up at the University of Utah, and you've only got $13 million in one.
This is a transportation bond.
Totally different.
Yeah.
But I mean, are you willing to look at bonding for buildings as well?
Yeah. Actually, we think we've satisfied at least the immediate need in being able to take care of buildings this year through the budget process. And I'll let you guess what that is for a little longer, but our building bonds and our highway bonds are 2 different animals, so to speak. They all move us toward a cap. But in our building bonds, we've only bonded for 7 years in the process we've gone through, and so we actually pay off all of our buildings next year.
The prison
we
bond,
own.
is that later this year, this fall, that's going to be issued
The
for the new prison?
the prison bond has been authorized, and we will take that down in pieces as we need it over the next 3 years as the construction moves forward.
There is some ongoing money there to pay for the bond, but they're using part of that to construct, so you're kind of trying to pay as you go a little bit, and then at some point in time you'll bond.
We put $70 million into the prison process 2 years ago, and when we did, it's allowed us to move to this point on cash. And so we haven't had to touch the bonds that we authorized.
One of the things that the president has talked about making sure that we do is, and probably be included in a bill if we get one out, when we get one out, that sets a limit of 50%. We don't go above 50% of our bonding
Constitutional limit.
constitutional limit. Now we're a little bit below that. This would allow us to stay below that 50%. And I think that's very wise to be able to make sure that we issue these bonds, these transportation bonds, if we do it over a period of time, so that we stay below that 50%.
President.
Yeah.
If, you know, after we came out of the recession, we had bonded to the point we were up close to 80% above our bond capacity. And we have paid that down now. We're paying off bonds in large tranches every year. And we paid that down to the point that we're well below that 50% number now. And as Senator Adams said, we're between 40 and 50% of capacity. And if we issue these bonds, part of what we would like to see is the legislation that goes through to issue those is that they can't come back to, or we can't go above that 50% unless, before any of those bonds are issued, they have to make sure that we're well below the 50% number.
And as we've done the models, it stays in the 40, maybe 45%, at least what we're projecting, and goes down to 30 and 20%. We're paying off about, I think this year, close to $300 million in bonding. And so if we do any bonding, we'll probably elongate it, meaning that we won't go out and borrow the entire amount, kind of like Senator Stevenson was talking at the prison. It will be done over 3 or 4, maybe 5 years, 3 to 4 probably though. And with that, we'll probably very seldom ever borrow more than we're paying off. It's almost a wash, but when you get down to the end of your mortgage, and if you've got $200,000 mortgage and you've got $18,000 of it left, and you've got a $2,000 a month, house payment, that $2,000 a month for that last year doesn't leverage yourself very well against that $18,000 in debt, and you're taking a lot of your family income to pay off that last little bit of debt. And we don't want to refinance because we don't want to push those bonds back out. So some of this actually makes some financial sense too. We should try to land at the end of that big bonding effort we made back in the I-15 days.
It's a tough call though, isn't it, as Republicans to bond?
It's been tough for me specifically because I thought we could get to a place where we didn't have any bonding, we just cash flow it. And when you cash flow it, you take the interest you would otherwise pay it on bonds and use it for road projects. So there's a great argument for that, but there's also an argument to the actual costs of road construction. I mentioned in the House caucus the other day that UDOT discovered a way to build bridges on the side of the road. And then over a weekend, put those bridges in place. Now, the cost is probably a little bit more to build it on the side and to move it in place than to build it right there. But the cost to the public in delays, congestion, that is a consideration that we need to have. And so some of these projects are so critical to us right now, like the GAP project down in Lehigh, some of this in Davis County, and then the worst place for congestion is in the South Interchange here in the Salt Lake Valley. So if we're able to come in and take an otherwise 3, maybe 3.5 year project and condense that down to a 2-year project, the cost to the public, the delays, the congestion, the frustration are minimized. There's going to be costs, there's going to be frustration, but if we can move that up and cause it to be less, maybe a year less of a project, that there's some huge benefits to the public. And the way we're doing this in tranches of maybe over a 4-year period, this isn't a $1 billion bond. This is gonna be if it is a 4-year bond or 4-year tranches, it's about $250 million each year. That's not gonna probably heat up the construction industry like a big $1 billion bond would be. And the other thing I think we need to emphasize is we're not listing projects. We're leaving it up to the commission to prioritize, and they know better than us. And while the politics are still played at a commission level, if we just opened up a $1 billion bond here, this would be, we'd be building projects all over the state, whether you needed them or not, just to get the vote. So the important part of this bill is that we're leaving that discretion to UDOT. And UDOT has come to us and said, while we haven't prioritized a couple projects here, like the Tooele project and maybe the northbound project at 90th South, the I-215 down there in the South Interchange, they have discovered that, knowing that this is a real congested area, they've discovered that this is a good solution over the last little while, and said, well, we don't have it prioritized, and it would be back in line. We need to move this one up because this is a critical need in an area that has probably the most congestion in the state.
The other issue that, I mean, you talk about cost, is the cost of, the cost of money versus the cost of inflation, as you weigh that too a little bit. And we're seeing some inflation in the construction market. And our cost to borrow is still very low, 1 or 2% is very low, maybe 2, I don't know, in that range. So inflation is probably going up higher than that. So you actually get more. But again, you have to decide if you think that's a financially sound process, and that's probably been the hardest for a lot of us, is we like to be debt-free, and we're very close with buildings. In fact, I think this year we will be, and this is probably not, Utah's I think our Department of Transportation is the best in the country, personally, and I think we're a very well-managed state. I think this is probably a good financial decision.
You have $1 billion into the debt limit? Over 4 years, you have $1 billion to still stay under the debt limit?
Oh yeah, we probably won't even pierce, we put in the bill that we can't go over 50% of the debt limit in any issuance of bonds, including the prison. And I don't think we exceed 47%.
Most of the years were
in these
30,
issuance.
38 to
And
46% is the range.
if you borrowed 250 million per year for the next 4 years, we'll actually be paying debt off faster than we're incurring it.
To your question, is it hard for Republicans to bond? We understand that we have these infrastructure needs that we're going to have to address as we see the growth, and so, it's been very important to us as we've seen what's happened the last couple of years in the legislature. When we passed the bill that allowed equalization in schools, it was a tax increase. Those are not easy. We did transportation increase in gas tax. That's not easy, but we understand that we are going to have to meet these needs that we've got coming up, and I think it's been a real priority for a couple of years for us to be able to start to address those issues. So yeah, it isn't easy, but something that we know we have to do. And now the question is, how do we do it? Try to be as wise as we can and frugal with taxpayer dollars and still be able to meet them.
I think I asked this question of a couple of you when I wrote this story a few days ago. There's been a lot of talk about lifting the earmark for transportation. I know the governor's pushed for that, and others. With this size of a bond, this opportunity, what does that mean for that earmark? Does that gain momentum to lift it?
No, I mean, we still have concerns about the earmark, but the way this bond proposal is designed, it's within the revenue streams that are currently within transportation and the earmarks. So this isn't really going to affect that in any way. One thing that would probably affect it, though, is Senator Van Tassel's bill to lower the threshold on the gas tax so that it kicks in earlier. there's gonna be a provision put in there that will actually, as gas tax increases, it will release earmarks at the same time. So that we keep the same revenue stream in transportation, but we're trying to expand the general fund at the same time for higher ed, and other issues in the general fund, relieving the pressure on the education fund, so we'll have more money to spend on public education.
So that's part of that stabilizing the base, that issue that you're talking about, so.
Yeah, this
that's
is
been
one of the
concern with
proposals.
With earmarking, right?
In an emergency situation, it's much easier to take money from a transportation account and put it into education than it is to lower WPU.
So,
And we've
yeah.
done
That
that,
isn't going to happen. So, I
And
mean,
that
that's-
counted 5 or 6 times since 2002.
It allows us that flexibility. Any questions from our viewers? Any other questions?
I guess just to clarify, so are we thinking that within the next week, we might see debate and vote on the transportation bonding?
Mhm.
Or is it something
I think that we'll actually be potentially debating the bill here on, well, I know we will be debating it here on Monday in the Senate.
It'll have to be.
Senator Harper is the sponsor.
And capital facilities, I think he has a bill that deals with bonding for those as well.
No, there isn't it's a budget bill that we've approved. Well, it hasn't been approved yet, it's still in the working. We're on the tail end of our budget process. We got pretty close last night as Senate and House leadership. So I think the fiscal analyst is now preparing those bills, and one of them is the infrastructure budget. And in there, I think there's the potential of a couple buildings anyway, but we've found a way to do it without bonding.
What would you describe as the overriding influence on the way that the budget's being finalized then right now?
We had a lot of revenue this year, and so I think it was easy for us to get a lot of things done, and maybe that's the reason why we're getting it done sooner than later. I've been here on a Saturday trying to work out the budget and those details, and we got most of those big items worked out last night. I think it's symptomatic of there being a pretty healthy revenue stream there. And we're still working out what's going to education, but I think you'll find at the end of the day that education is going to get a large chunk of that money, and that we'll have a robust appropriation to both public ed and higher ed.
I compliment Senator Stevenson, Representative Sampay, and the President and Speaker. They've led this effort, especially Senator Stevenson and Representative Sampay. They've done a great job this year, obviously. If we're at this point in time and coming together, it's been a great process.
I think we'll have more information for you tomorrow on the budget.
And our caucuses also have our budget, which seems pretty, I'm sure it will be very similar. I mean, the committees did a great job, and I
They
also
did do
commend
a
the
great
committees.
job.
We expected less revenue, and obviously having, kind of like celebrating the great news. But we also went through our process, and our caucuses both worked together. So we have the minority caucus budget, which looks great, and we feel comfortable, and give some ideas to the members of the majority also on finding some spots where we think is critical to fund, because at the end you have to, as Senator Hillier will say, you have to get it from somewhere and most likely take it away from somewhere else. So we've worked really hard to find those spots where we think we can, move money, and we feel really good about our budget. So, we're looking forward to working those final details with the majority as well.
When are you going to
It's
release your
probably
budget?
today as we wait for, that theirs, but we should, ours is done. It's just a matter of, just some details, but should we probably make it public today at the end of the day.
You have a news conference or?
No, we're not doing a news conference. That's not the plan, but I don't know if the House, it's hard for me to speak on behalf of the House. They like to be more media driven, if that's a good word for them. But, so they may run a press conference, but right now that's not the plan. But we feel good about what we have and work with them, evenings with them and our staff as well.
Do you have $1 billion bond over 4 years in the budget?
No bonds, we actually found the money somewhere else and it's, you know, it looks good, and it also.
The conservatives in the room, right? The Democrats.
I did not say anything, stand up, somebody else said it.
We need to get a caucus meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks,
President.
everyone.
Thank you, President.
Thank you.